Okay. All right. So we're going to start on again, just as defining and explaining some of the major theories of personality. And then we will go from there on. Again, this Thursday, we'll talk more specifically about cultural influences. So, to kind of start, let's talk about what is personality. So, the study of personality has also been called the study of individual differences because what it's trying to capture is what makes you different, what makes you the same as the person sitting next to you. Um, uh, uh, what captures your essence when you're in a group of people versus alone? What is your emotional propensities? Are you a very emotional reactive or are you non-emotionally reactive? Are you talkative, not talkative? All of those features that make you uniquely who you are is what we're really interested in when we're studying personality. Okay. So, as a basic definition, it is the characteristic thoughts, emotional responses, and behaviors that are relatively stable in an individual over time and across circumstances. Okay. So let's start with the word personality because it comes from the word persona. Persona is a what was a mask worn uh, by Roman actors portraying in I can't talk all of a sudden in a Greek drama before the birth of Christ. So it's how they it's basically a mask. Okay. And this term developed from Carl Jung's idea. As you will see, our first theory posits that most of our emotions, behaviors, the way we act, come from a very unconscious place. That really our conscious life is just this safe thing we put out there. It's a safe appearance, when in reality, what drives us are these more darker, unconscious motives, as we'll get to in a minute. So Carl Jung kind of felt like the persona was a false appearance of the role one plays in life. Okay. It's our surface appearance. Okay. Um, Now, I will say there's lots of theories on personality, and there's lots of theories within psychology, like we have discussed in this semester. And one of the issues is personality theories kind of get at one part of our personality, and then others have to kind of fill in the blanks. So that's the way I kind of think about this conversation, because the modern view of persona, which is part of our personality, is that basically you are more than what you portray. Okay. There's more to you than how you say act at work or act at in school or that there's a lot more to you than what is presented to the world uh, is kind of the notion that personality is getting at. And again, we'll go through what's called trait theory. So we've all taken these tests, right? That tells us if we're introverted or extroverted, outgoing, open to experience all of these different factors. And it's interesting because what we think it is it's portraying something about us that we don't know or don't understand. And that's kind of this notion of there's more to you than what you actually realize. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about biology versus environment, because in a lot of Western culture, if we look at, for example, well, up until the American experience, uh, it was believed that your personality and your place in the world was biologically set. Okay. So if you read back in the Romans and Greek times and up through the Middle Ages in Western society, It was the bloodline that kept the kings and the queens, and it was blood relations that made people who they are, whether they be the kings or the servants or the merchants or whatever it is. You were born into that. Your personality is something you're born with. Okay. And then with the American experience, when we get up into the 1600s, 1700s, and whatnot in Western society, where it was meant that every man, as you would say, what is it, the Declaration of Independence, every man has a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There started to be a focus that the environment and the situation shapes us to who we are. Um, and that we're much more, our personality is much more based on our experiences than our biology. Okay. In modern science, the way that we measure how much of how much of our personality is due to biology versus in environment is what's called the inheritable quotient. Okay. And what this is it's basically done with twin studies, especially monozygotic or identical twin studies, where the two twins were raised in separate environments. And then they measure these different personality factors. Okay. Those personality factors that tend to be similar uh, are an influence of biology, is the assumption. Those things that are different between the two identical twins then tends to be given to the environment. Okay. And that's basically how a lot of these studies on the inheritability, the biological inheritability of things like personality are measured. Okay. And it's interesting because we really haven't refined how much our personality is due to genetics, to inheritability, versus how much is due to environment, because dependent upon the study you read and the kind of the theoretical bend of the author, in a lot of studies, you get anywhere from about 25% of our personality is due to biology. And then in other studies, you get up to about 60% is due to our biology. So our biology, our genetics explains somewhere between about 25 to 60% of our personality is where the science is at this moment. So this suggests, though, that a good portion of who we are due to environmental influences, such as culture, such as our family, the way our family is upbrings us, and those types of factors. So it's good to bring this up now because we're going to see that indeed culture plays a huge role in the shaping of our personality. Okay. And so let's talk about some theories that have been proposed for what makes people unique. Okay. And again, I want to express that no one theory explains all aspects of an individual's personality. We haven't got that refined yet in this exploration. Probably one of the very first formal theories of personality comes from the psychoanalytic theories. This is Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, Erik Erikson, and those bunch of individuals. And if you remember from the introduction at the beginning of the semester, what psychoanalysts emphasize is the unconscious processes, that we are who we are due to these unconscious desires and needs that need to be fulfilled somehow. But also remember that with analytics, um, uh, early childhood experience is really what shapes us to be who we are, specifically our interactions with our mother. If you, anyone that's seen the Freud jokes, you marry your mom, um, who's your mama's boy, those kind of jokes, those come from Freud. Okay. The idea of a mama's boy and all that is a Freudian type of idea, and that you marry your mother or you marry your father is a Freudian idea because it's in this conflictual phase of early childhood where we're trying to satisfy or gratify sexual or aggressive needs, that we learn how to do that with the love object in our world, which is usually our mother in this kind of sense. Okay. So what does psychoanalytics say? Yes. Uh, what can we use it to analyze in our modern times or our modern understanding of personalities? Is yes, we do commit behaviors that we're not always aware of, that we always didn't intend to do, that come from unconscious limbic system drives, if we want to put it in brain terms. The other thing that we can take away from psychoanalytic approach is that early childhood does matter. In fact, the biggest predictor of whether a child will go to college, for example, is their attitude towards school at the age of 5. Okay. If they're going to be a quote unquote white collar worker or blue collar worker, given that they have the opportunity to go have either jobs, is determined by the age of 5. Most of your identity, a lot of theories talk about identity formation in adolescence, but indeed, most of our identity and who we are developed by the age of 5. Okay. So a lot of personality and everything develops by the age of 5, and then we continue the process as we grow and we develop. Okay. So those are some important takeaway notes from psychoanalytic theory. And probably I should mention the last thing that psychoanalytic theory does emphasize is that we do have an aggressive side. Okay. That indeed we're a protective species, and we can be highly aggressive at times. And the other thing is that other theories really do a poor job of emphasizing is that we are also a sexual species, and that we do have sexual desires that sometimes we can't fulfill, so we do it in other ways. We fulfill those pleasures in other ways, such as engaging in gaming or engaging in a sport or um, 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 what was I going to say? I can't remember. But we are sexual beings, but we don't always take out those needs or those desires in a sexual way. Yes, Bond, Bond, the gratification seeking behaviors. Thank you for uh, helping me with that mental block. Okay. And so those are the important aspects that I think we can take away from psychoanalytic theory. Okay. Humanistic theory is the emphasis of self-concept, the whole individual. And unlike a lot of psychoanalytic and learning theories, it focuses on our potential, our ability to make choices, free will, and that we're all aiming towards the best person we can be. We're not just here drifting through our life. Each one of us is doing that seeking, that self-seeking to really learn who we are as a person. Okay. Now, trait theory is probably something that everyone uh, relates to personality theory. Trait theory emphasizes the enduring dispositions or qualities that contribute to a person's ability to relate, communicate, and behave. Okay. So this is whether you're extroverted or introverted, open to experience, closed to experience, all of those little personality tests that come with, sometimes Facebook or something like that says, hey, find out if you're aggressive, intelligent, those types of things. That's kind of trait theory. Okay. And so it kind of gives us more of our dispositional qualities. It doesn't tell us everything about who we are or why we do what we do, but it tells us about what our preferences are on different dimensions. Okay. And then the ideographical approach emphasizes an individual experience and life story to explain personality. So this is really where we look at the individual and all of their experiences that brought them to who they are today. Okay. So this includes all the happy moments, all the trauma moments, everything that is influencing you. I always like to think of this in the show I think it's Inside Out, where there's those little features inside you, those emotional emojis, and they have those things called core memories. Okay. And those core memories are really what makes the young girl who she is. All right. This is kind of that ideographical approach, is finding those core memories, those core moments that really explain why a person acts, behaves, and feels the way they feel. Okay. And then the last approach that we should talk about is what's called the social cognitive approach. This emphasizes awareness, beliefs, expectations, and goals in developing our personality. Okay. So this is the way we think about the world and how we behave. Okay. The issue, though, that we'll get into with the social cognition approach is we're always using mostly hindsight when we do something, right? So sometimes we do something totally stupid without thinking about it first. And then afterwards we go, oh, I should have done this. I should have done that. Well, if I would have done this. And so social cognition, we need to also look at our biases, because we don't always do things that are congruent with our beliefs and values. Sometimes we behave in a totally different way than how we feel or believe in. Okay. So we'll get to that when we get to that section. And we'll also see that culture plays a huge role on this social cognitive perspective. Okay. So in this conversation, we should start with two individuals who really emphasized the individual. Okay, and this is William James and the self, and the second one, of course, is Freud with his unconscious dynamic processes, and B.F. Skinner and John B. Watson, who believed everything is a learned process. Okay. And these are really the beginnings of the development of formal personality type theories. Okay. But let's start with William James. William James differentiated between the me and the I. Okay. I should go back and just mention William James, if you remember at the beginning of the semester when we were going through philosophies and whatnot, we talked about an approach in psychology where we don't really care about the component of the mind, but we care about its function and what it's there for. How does it guide us and direct us? Okay. And in this, William James came up with the differentiation between the me and the I. Okay. The I is recognizing yourself as yourself. Okay. So it is that thing in you that even though you may have been very talkative in a class, you recognize that in most situations you're a very reserved individual, that you're humble. But in certain situations, you might be not so humble and more talkative, but that I is always there. Okay. The me, the best way that I think about the differentiation between I and me is when you look at a picture or something and it's not you, but you say, that looks like me. Or when you say, oh, that could be me if I was in that situation. The me is recognizing yourself outside of yourself. It's recognizing those things and those people in the environment that are similar to you. And it's kind of that person that you think that you reflect to the world. Hence, that's when you say stuff like, I could see me doing that in that situation. You're recognizing that that's how you think you're viewed by other people, that that's how you're seen as by others. And the reason why it's important to differentiate between the two is the I is kind of that person that you are. And that me is that person you hope you are or you think you are. And there's not always a one-to-one congruency with these two things. Okay. William James did coin two terms in the field of psychology. The first one was the self-concept, and he was the first to use the term self-esteem. Okay. Self-concept is basically all of the different aspects that make you you, that you can claim as yourself. I'm not sure if I have. Okay. So if we were to represent this self, okay, as a circle, everything that you say you are or you are, it would be put inside of this circle. Okay. Now for James, he divided the self-concept into two. Okay. One aspect is what he called the social self. This is everything that you are based upon, I'm probably spelling this wrong. Oh, well, based upon what your world gives to you. Okay. So if you're a man or a woman, that's defined by our social language world. Okay. Whether you're a child or you're an adult is socially defined. Um, your occupation is socially defined. Um, and to kind of emphasize this point, why am I called the professor and you're called the student? Why not in our class we change this? I'll be the student, but I'll act as the professor. Okay. Point being is that your social self is everything that defines you by your social world. Okay. So student, professor, man, woman, transgender, um, uh, ethnicity, Black, white, Native American, European American, German, Tucsonian, Arizonian. All of those things are defined by our social world. Okay. The other part, which is what we're really focusing on here, is something that William James referred to as the spiritual self. Okay. Later on, this is going to be known as the personal self. Okay. These are all the qualities that define you as a different, separate person than the person sitting next to you. Okay. A good example is if we were all in this class, you're all defined as students. So that's your social identity. That's your social self-concept that you would share with everybody in the class. But while you all are in that identity moment, you all still have a uniqueness about you that makes you different than the student sitting next to you. Or, in our Zoom thing, the picture sitting next to your picture on the Zoom screen. Okay. These are all those qualities that make you uniquely you. And this is what we're really interested in this situation is we know that culture and everything defines all of these social aspects. And we've already talked about identity and whatnot. Now what we're talking about is what is culture's role in your uniqueness and what uniquely makes you unique. Okay. Now, this self-concept, it then draws to our self-esteem. Most people, most I'm saying, generally want to think well of themselves. Okay, they want to view themselves as worthy and and capable. Okay, and this is really what James was getting to when he defined self-esteem. It's our affective, our emotional evaluation of us, ourself in action. It's a positive or negative evaluation. Now, the word that I want you to focus on when we're talking about self-esteem is affective, which also can be the word that could be substituted here is our emotional evaluation. And as you have probably learned, emotions are not always rational. Okay. And so you can have the most successful person in the world, but they may have really, really, really low self-esteem. Okay. Because it's an irrational evaluation of who we are. It's not always correct. And that's why when it comes to depression and those kinds of things, we try to increase self-esteem. Okay. Now, I am going to say the study of self-esteem has always had mixed results. I think one of my psychology friends put it best, my colleagues, I should say, is that self-esteem is related to everything but predicts nothing. Okay. Meaning, if we take all the factors into consideration, self-esteem has a personal impact on us and the way we view the world, but it doesn't necessarily predict our behaviors and our performance. Okay. So, yeah, it can have a critical effect on us and it can make us not do certain things that we want to do because we don't feel we're worthy of it. But if we were told to engage in that activity, our self-esteem would not necessarily predict the outcome. Okay. Just another note on self-esteem. It's not always healthy to change someone's self-esteem. In the early days of batter's treatment, I'm going to go off on a tangent here for just a second. In the earlier years of batter's treatment, domestic violence abuser treatment, it was believed that the theory of domestic violence at that time is that you started with an individual with really, really low self-esteem. And the reason they engaged in psychological and physical battery, harm, is to push someone lower than their self-esteem, which would make them feel better about themselves. Okay. And so in the early days of domestic violence treatment, domestic violence offender treatment, there was a huge focus on increasing the abuser's self-esteem, increasing it, making them feel more positive about themselves. Okay. Now, I mentioned that self-esteem is not always good to increase because actually what we found is that when you increase the self-esteem of a domestic abuser, they become more efficient and effective at abusing someone. They get confidence in what they're doing. They feel so good about themselves that they justify their domestic abusing behaviors and they actually become worse, not better. Okay. So when we think about self-esteem, increasing self-esteem is going to increase that person's behaviors into more frequent behaviors. So if we're talking about domestic abusers, murderers, we did this in prisons. It makes people who commit crimes be more efficient at committing those crimes. And so when we're talking about increasing self-esteem, it's not always, it doesn't always have a positive outcome, is I guess what I'm trying to say. Okay. So we have the self-concept, the self-esteem aspect going. We have how we view ourselves and how we see ourselves. Let's go on to then learning theory. And this is B.F. Skinner and John B. Watson. This field, as I mentioned at the beginning of the semester, is going to take up about half a century in the 1900s. And it's going to basically erase the mind from the study of psychology, because the basics of behavioral approach is that what we think, our thought processes, our emotional processes are just byproducts. Consciousness is a byproduct of stimuluses in the environment and the organism's response to that stimulus. Okay. That really consciousness is just this, literally a byproduct. Okay. And that all behavior in extreme learning theory, all behavior is a consequence of classical and operant conditioning. Classical conditioning being associative learning. So we go to the kitchen and we feel hungry. We go to the bedroom and look at the bed and we get tired. Okay. These are all kind of associative learning type of things. Operant conditioning is our reward and punishment. So we do something right, we get a reward that increases the probability that we'll do that behavior in the future, and vice versa with punishment. Okay. So I don't want to beat this too much and get too deep into learning theory at this moment, but what I am going to say is part of our personality a consequence of learning and conditioning? And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. Okay. That we learn to associate different environments with parts of our personality. So parts of our personality probably come out much different when we're home alone at our house versus when we're out clubbing versus when we're in a classroom. Different personality features have associated those environments with certain behaviors. Are there products of reward and punishment? And again, the answer is absolutely yes. Okay. That yes, some of us who were individuals, young children who were rewarded for talking and standing up and those types of things tend to be a bit more extroverted, tend to be more talkative. Children who were told to be quiet and not talk tend to be less quiet, less talkative, those kinds of things. So yes, learning does play a role. However, the reason why we don't talk about pure learning theory anymore is that humans are much more complex. Okay. For example, for example, trauma is one of those environmental events that can change our personality abruptly. Okay, so trauma being in a violent car wreck, to being sexually abused, to being assaulted in some way, going to a war zone. You have probably all heard stories of a military person who, before going to active duty in a war zone, they were very kind, outgoing, friendly. And then when they came back, they tended to be very offish, rude, aggressive. And that was due to that trauma. Okay. Now, the complexity of this is the level of trauma does not always predict the outcome. Okay. So, for example, when I worked in the field of domestic abuse and sexual assault, there were some individuals that I worked with that were violently sexually assaulted and beaten. And they had no change in their behavior or affect or personality. And then I had on the other end of the scale someone who uh, experienced what you would consider more of a minor trauma, and it had a huge impact on the change of their personality and their affect. Okay, so the complexity of learning theory isn't always that a reward and punishment is always going to lead to something. It really depends on the subjective experience of the individual. Okay, and this is what led to what's called Kurt Lewin's equation to understanding human personality and human behavior. Is he said that behavior equals, and this F is for function, and then everything inside these parentheses, it contributes to that function. So behavior is a function of P and E, where B is your behavior, P is the person, what the person brings to the situation, and E is environment. Environment being what is in the environment that brings about the personality based or behavior based on that person. Okay. So behavior is a function of the person and their environment. And this is where we're going to start seeing some interaction between the individual and environment to produce one's behavior. All right. I'm trying to get through these theories kind of quickly so that we can talk more about culture on Thursday. So I apologize. So I did want to emphasize more on the biological determinants. Like I said, this is actually 25 or 20 to 60%. But I do want to bring up why we think that we get such a wide version. As I mentioned, that most of these studies to determine biology is done on twin studies where identical twins were separated at birth. And the assumption is that those different environments, if there's differences in personality, it was due to the environment. If there's similarities in personality, it must be due to biology. The problem is that no matter what environment we're in, a child is treated the same. And I'm going to bring this kind of up in an example of teaching. Okay. So in a series of studies, we took teachers and we said, do you treat everyone in your class the same? And we had some teachers who were honest and said, no, different students need different amounts of attention, those kinds of things. But the ones we were interested in is the teachers who said they treat all of their children equally the same, give them the same amount of attention, same amount of everything. Okay. And then, of course, we go measure their behavior. And we find that no matter how egalitarian the teacher claims to be, they tend to give more of the attractive children more positive attention, more positive feedback, more time. And they tended to give the unattractive students more negative feedback, more punitive comments, and less amount of attention. Okay. So this is even among the most egalitarian teachers that we see this play out. Okay. And so the issue that we're having with a lot of these twin studies is that are the similarities in personality due to biology, or is it due to the fact that based on the appearance of that child, their attractiveness level, those types of things, both of them are basically going to be treated in a similar fashion by teachers and parents and family members. And so this is kind of the issue with the biological aspect of and determining how much personality is due to biology based upon these identical twin studies. Okay. There is one personality factor, one personality trait that we believe is approaching 100%, but because we're good scientists, we're going to say is at least 98, 99% determined by our biology, and that's our temperament. Okay. Temperament being defined as how emotionally reactive we are. So we've heard of things like a hothead. That's someone who reacts very aggressively, uh, very quickly. And then we've mentioned people who are cool-minded. These are individuals who don't react emotionally right away. They kind of sit back and they process it. Okay. What we find is temperament has to do with our biology. Your temperament you were given to you by either your mother or your father, dependent upon the flip of a coin with the genetics. Okay, um, and and uh, and we can actually see this play out in the brain. So people with a quick temper tend to have a very reactive amygdala system. It's very, very active all the time. Whereas people who have more of a cool temperament, their amygdala area isn't as reactive. It's not as active as someone with a quick temperament. Okay. And so this is one area that is biologically determined, but the way that it is used is based on what we learn about ourselves. So there are people who have very, very, very quick temperaments, but have learned to control their temperament. Okay. And to kind of step back. And if it's something that makes them really angry, they've learned to kind of step back, take a moment for themselves, get control of. It's almost that person that is sitting there next to you at a heated debate or something that is shaking their leg and going, "Oh, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to say anything." This is someone who has learned to control that temperamental aspect of themselves. Okay. We have noted that personality is adaptive. We seem to be soft wired to develop a personality that fits our unique adaptive needs. Okay. So, based upon your environment, it seems that we're biologically soft wired to develop a personality that makes it so we're survivable within that situation. Okay. And we do note that different personality levels seem to be linked to different neurological processes, but we're not convinced that this is due to genetics. Okay. All right. So just to kind of review a little bit more in depth about some of these major theories, we mentioned Sigmund Freud at the beginning of the semester. We mentioned that he believed that our two most basic instinctive drives are sex and aggression. Um, and we should note just really quickly again that his theory was derived from working with his clinical population, and that he felt by examining the clinical population, he could make generalizations about everyone. Okay. And that's probably one of the reasons why sex and aggression was emphasized so much by him. And so again, what he possessed about our personality is that most of our personality is driven by our unconscious desires and needs, and that really our persona or our conscious level exists just above in this iceberg. So 10% of the reason why we do what we do or behave the way we do are due to consciousness. 90% is due to these unconscious needs that need to be satisfied. Okay. And in his model, if you remember, we have the id, which houses the aggressive and sexual drives that we all have. We have an ego. This is our executive controller who kind of says, all right, this is how we need to satisfy this type of thing given what's going on in our world. And we have our super ego, which is what Freud referred to as our moral aspect. And in Freudian terms, I don't want you to consider morality as good and valued behaviors. No, morality in terms of behavior is in terms of psychoanalytics is perfectionism. Okay, that it's that someone who has, well, let's go through these. Okay, so a person who has an oversized id that dominates their unconscious and has a smaller ego and a smaller super ego tend to become pleasure seekers. Okay. A person who has an oversized super ego and then the other two are undersized tend to be guilt-ridden because they're always questioning whether what they're doing is right or wrong. So they're constantly questioning themselves because they're not meeting that perfectionist place that they feel they should be. Okay. And then what psychoanalytic wants to do is it wants to make it so that we have an oversized ego that really is controlling, being the executive of who we are, that's balancing our need for the id and the super ego. Okay. And in this perspective, it's important to state that you don't get rid of those aggressive and sexual drives. You don't get rid of the perfectionist aspects. You balance them, okay? Because if you deny your pleasures, if you deny the need to behave correctly in a situation, then you're going to end up hurting yourself. You hear about the person who spirals and then ends up at rock bottom. It's because there's a denial of these different aspects of the self. Okay. And this is then what leads to what Freud termed as defense mechanisms. Okay, and actually, it's interesting. We give Sigmund Freud credit for defense mechanisms, but he never actually used these terms. It was actually his daughter Anna Freud who came up with this notion of defense mechanisms, and these are mechanisms that protect our ego or our personality or sense of who we are. Okay. So we'll rehearse these really quick, and probably by the end of this, we'll be done with today's class, and we'll finish up these reviews of different theories on Thursday. But let's rehearse these really quick. So denial is not acknowledging that there is a problem at all. This is something that commonly run into, for example, with people who have substance use issues or addictive issues, saying that I'm not an alcoholic or I'm not a drug addict, I'm not this, I'm not that. It's being diagnosed with something and denying that it happened. Okay. I remember when I was diagnosed with congestive heart failure due to cardiomyopathy, which is an oversized left ventricle. I denied that. I went and did some really stupid stuff, ate really bad, all that, because I thought it was ridiculous. And that's a form of denial. Okay. Repression is a suppression of a memory until it disappears into the subconscious. Okay. So, for example, a woman doesn't recall being raped. Okay. Now, I should note that we can't purposely forget something. Okay. We don't have that ability, and probably the most simple example of we can't forget something is what's called the pink elephant phenomenon. Okay. So let's say that I had you close your eyes and I want you to picture a pink elephant. Okay. It can be a fluffy, stuffed pink elephant. It could be a live pink elephant. Just get a very vivid picture of a pink elephant in your mind. Okay. And then what I would do is I would then say, all right, once you forgot about that pink elephant, raise your hand or let me know that you have forgotten about that pink elephant. And indeed, in classes, I have students who will raise their hand and say, Dr. Peterson, I forgot. And I said, what did you forget? I forgot about the pink elephant. Well, you just remembered it again because you remembered what you weren't supposed to recall. So the point being is that we can't purposely, consciously forget something. Okay. However, the brain does have protective mechanisms. In certain traumas, the limbic system, the amygdala, and the hippocampus, where memories are stored, will get together. I'm going to put this in an animated version. Get together and say, okay, this person is not going to remember this memory until it's safe for them to do so. Okay. And so to give you some examples of what I mean about this is when I used to work with sexual assault victims, I always marked on my calendar to give that individual, that survivor, a call about 9 months after the assault event. Okay. Because usually by about 9 months, the person is in a safe place. They have their intimate relationships kind of stabilized or resolved. Okay. On that, just another side note, most men, about I think it's 85% of men leave their spouse or their girlfriend after they've been sexually assaulted. Something that is kind of an interesting statistic. But anyways, by about 9 months, they've either resolved that relationship or they've stabilized it. By that time, they got psychological and hopefully social distance between them and the offender. Okay. And so they're feeling safe. And this is where the brain says, well, here you go. Here's this memory. So I call them and they often would say, oh, I feel like I'm going crazy. I smell a certain smell and I start to cry. I start to panic. I see certain things. I wake up in the middle of the night with night terrors because the brain has then said, well, this repressed memory is now safe for this individual to recall. This is also why some people don't recall child molestation until after they leave their house and go to college or go to their own home or apartment. Because while they're in that house, the brain is saying, no, no, this isn't a safe place for you to remember this. And so it's after they leave that then all of a sudden those memories and those emotions start flooding the individual. Okay. So that's repression, as we can put it. Projection, and if you notice, all of these are to protect the self, to protect the individual's personality, attitudes, and belief systems. Projection is putting your own beliefs or behaviors onto someone else. So, talking about how stupid a video game system with someone else believes that they must feel the same way, even though they never said so. Okay. So projection is putting all of our negative thoughts and emotions onto someone else. And I'll say, I'll kind of provide this point about the priest who is hurting children, but then on the pulpit says that it's the low lives that hurt children. It's the low lives in the world, that the sinners, those people who have rejected God, are the abusers, the sinners, and the herder of children. Okay, that is probably the most blatant version of projection, putting your own negative thoughts and inappropriate behaviors and thoughts onto someone else. Okay. Regression is acting in a way that's not typical of your age. So it's becoming more childlike. And we see regression when stress increases. So, for example, again, talking about the field of domestic violence and stuff like this, defense attorneys know about regression perfectly. Okay. Regression is when the brain is feeling such a threat that it has to revert to its best learned behaviors to deal with that threat. Okay. And our best well-learned behaviors occurred between the age of 3 to 6. Okay. And so if you, I don't know about you guys, but sometimes when I was a little kid and I got hurt or something, I didn't know exactly how to react. So sometimes I would laugh. I might joke it off in a way, just think that I'm supposed to be laughing instead of crying. I don't know if anyone else has had this experience, but I know it's a common experience among children. Well, defense attorneys know this well, so when they're berating the victim or survivor on the stand, they get them stressed and stressed and stressed and stressed and stressed until hoping that what they'll do is they'll laugh out of stress. And then the defense attorney then turns to the judge and says, see, they think it's funny. This is just a joke to them. We should just end the trial right now. And so that's one example. Another example is with regression is when we get in an argument with our intimate partner. Okay. A lot of times arguments start off very conscious, literal. We're going to have this discussion. And then if you notice a lot of arguments, we both end up acting like 3 5-year-olds, giving each other ridiculous profanity names and doing a little slappy thing, just like a 3 to 5-year-old. These are all forms of regression. Okay. Displacement is showing emotions towards someone or something completely unrelated, which caused the emotion. So in the example here, an alcoholic gets in an accident, driving drunk, and blames his wife, who is at home, for example. When I worked in the corrections field, it wasn't uncommon for the inmate to say it was the cop's fault. It was the judge's fault. It was that a-hole that called 911. It was my worthless attorney are the reasons I ended up getting in the place I am. And so it's protecting that individual, that they did something that society deemed as wrong, but their personality and whatnot is so fragile that they have to use displacement to deal with that, to kind of feel themselves as I'm still a good, worthy person despite where I'm at. And displacement is a very common thing for those who commit crimes and get caught. Okay. And then, of course, part of correctional reform is to get a person to take responsibility for their criminal behavior and get rid of that displacement. Okay. And then rationalization, this is making up some explanation for the reason it happened. It's rationalizing it. So a rapist thinks that since the girl he was raping looked at him seductively one time, it must be okay to rape her. Okay, that kind of victim blaming. It was because of the victim, and those types of things. So the reason why these are important is that they're all mechanisms to protect the self, to protect our personality. And we'll end with this today. as far as our discussion on personality today, these all have a cultural influence. Okay. The way we deny our repression techniques, displacement techniques, the way we protect our individual self is very culturally influenced, as we will see this coming Thursday. Okay. But before we get to the cultural aspects, we're going to finish with Freud's emphasis on early childhood. We're going to take a look at some Karen Horney, Carl Jung's. Carl Jung's is interesting because he came up with what's known as the collective unconscious. For those who study the idea of um, inherited trauma, it kind of comes from this notion of the collective unconscious that he talked about, which we'll get to. Adler will talk about individuals. We'll talk about the humanistic approach and these ideas of wanting to become the best who we can become. And then we'll end with trait theory and a little bit on social learning theory. And then we'll get into a discussion. So based on all of this that we know, what is culture's influence on these different aspects of who we are as individuals? So that's kind of where we're headed. Let me stop sharing right now. I'm going to stop our